After 50 years, a decades-old mystery has finally unraveled in the heart of Texas. The Dallas cold case that haunted investigators since 1973 has reached its shocking conclusion with an arrest that has left an entire community reeling. The truth, buried for half a century, has emerged with devastating consequences for those who thought the past was truly behind them. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Samuel Ortiz navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the Dallas Police Department's archival basement. March in Texas brought warmth outside, but down here, the air remained perpetually cool and stale. The young technician adjusted his glasses, consulting the inventory sheet on his department-issued tablet. The citywide modernization project had seemed straightforward when his supervisor described it. Digitize old case files, create searchable databases, bring Dallas PD into the 21st century. Nobody mentioned the dust that coated everything, or how the weight of forgotten stories would press against his chest. 3 more sections to go, Samuel muttered to himself, wheeling the cart between towering metal shelves. His fingers traced the labels of weathered cardboard boxes, each containing fragments of lives interrupted. The basement housed thousands of cases, solved and unsolved alike, their physical evidence preserved in this underground tomb of memories. He paused when his hand brushed against a box unlike the others. While neighboring containers showed signs of occasional handling, this one remained sealed with its original evidence tape, untouched since the 70s. The yellowed label, typed on what must have been an old manual typewriter, read, Collins L.R., Oak Cliff, 1973, evidence. Samuel checked his inventory list again. This box wasn't even in the system. "Hey, I think I found something," he called out, though no one was there to hear him. The isolation of the archives meant he often worked alone, his voice occasionally breaking the silence just to remind himself he existed. With gloved hands, Samuel carefully lifted the lid. The smell hit him immediately, that distinctive scent of time itself, paper aged to brittleness, dust undisturbed for decades, and the faint metallic hint of rust from old paper clips. Inside, everything remained perfectly preserved in the order it was placed nearly 50 years ago. A sealed nylon evidence bag contained what appeared to be a blood-stained scrap of fabric, its original color impossible to determine beneath the dark brown stains. Beside it lay another bag holding a single silver earring, tarnished by years but still catching the dim basement light. Brittle Polaroid photographs showed scenes Samuel couldn't immediately identify. A street corner, a wooded area, what looked like a bedroom frozen in time. Beneath these, handwritten reports filled out in careful penmanship detailed the first days of an investigation that apparently never reached conclusion. Samuel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. Something about this case, this moment, felt electric, as if he'd accidentally completed a circuit between past and present. He couldn't shake the sensation that the evidence before him wasn't just waiting to be cataloged. It was waiting to be found. After 48 years of silence, these remnants of Linda Ray Collins seemed to whisper for resolution. Detective Ava Moreno's phone buzzed just as she was reviewing case files in her modest office at the Dallas Police Department. Her supervisor, Captain Reynolds, requested her immediate presence regarding a discovery in the archives. As head of the cold case division, Ava had grown accustomed to these calls, but something in the captain's voice suggested this was different. "Samuel Ortiz found something you need to see," Captain Reynolds explained as Ava entered the conference room. The young technician stood nervously beside a weathered cardboard box, his eyes bright with excitement. "Collins L.R." Ava read from the label, her breath catching slightly. Every detective in Dallas knew about the Linda Ray Collins disappearance, the case that haunted Oak Cliff for generations. Ava had grown up hearing about it. Her father, now retired from the force, had mentioned it often as one of the department's great unsolved mysteries. The box was sealed and untouched since 1974, Samuel explained, his voice barely containing his enthusiasm. I thought you should be the first to examine it properly. Ava nodded, pulling on latex gloves with practiced precision. Her colleagues often remarked on her meticulous nature, but it was this attention to detail that had earned her the Cold Case Division leadership. She carefully lifted each item from the box, mentally cataloging everything. The brittle Polaroids showing the search areas, handwritten witness statements, and preliminary reports. Her attention fixed on a sealed nylon evidence bag containing what appeared to be fabric. The detective ran her finger along the edge of the yellowed tape securing it. The seal crackled under her touch, but remained intact, pristine after nearly 5 decades. No one's tampered with this, she said, more to herself than to Samuel or her supervisor. Chain of custody is unbroken. The significance wasn't lost on anyone in the room. In cold cases, evidence integrity often determined whether prosecution was even possible. This untouched seal meant that whatever DNA might be present would be legally admissible, a rare gift in cases this old. We should run modern tests immediately, Ava said, her typically reserved demeanor giving way to a flicker of excitement. The blood on this fabric could tell us everything that 1970s technology couldn't. Samuel nodded eagerly. I've already contacted the forensics lab. They're standing by. Ava carefully returned the evidence to the box, her mind racing through protocols and possibilities. The Collins case had been a ghost story, a cautionary tale parents in Oak Cliff told their children. Now it was becoming something else, an active investigation. This could change everything, the detective said quietly, meeting her supervisor's gaze. For the first time in years, the Collins case wasn't just a painful memory. It was a possibility, a chance for answers, a path to justice long delayed. Oak Cliff shimmered under the relentless Texas sun in the summer of 1973. Heat waves danced above the asphalt, and window air conditioning units hummed their constant battle against the sweltering temperatures. For 19-year-old Linda Ray Collins, this was just another Wednesday in July, no different from countless others before it. Linda emerged from her family's modest white-paneled home on Edgefield Avenue at precisely 7:30, her routine as predictable as the cicadas' evening chorus. She wore her favorite blue dress, a silver earring catching the morning light as she waved goodbye to her mother. Mrs. Collins stood watching from the wooden porch, one hand raised in farewell, the other clutching a half-empty coffee mug, a ritual as familiar to both women as sweet tea at Sunday dinner. Be home by 6, her mother called out, the same words she spoke every morning. Linda nodded, adjusting her purse strap before heading down the cracked sidewalk toward Jefferson Boulevard, where the corner pharmacy awaited her arrival for the morning shift. The neighborhood was coming alive, children riding bicycles, housewives hanging laundry, men in work clothes starting their automobiles. Mrs. Donovan next door watered her petunias while Mr. Reeves checked his mailbox. Everything normal, everything safe. Oak Cliff wasn't perfect, but it was home. A community where everyone knew everyone else's business, for better or worse. But Linda never arrived at work that day. By noon, the pharmacy owner had called the Collins residence. By 3, Linda's mother had phoned every friend and relative in her address book. By nightfall, panic had erupted throughout the neighborhood. Men with flashlights combed the winding streets and wooded lots behind the high school. Church friends organized prayer circles on the Collins front lawn. Police officers took statements and examined Linda's bedroom for clues. She wouldn't just run off, her mother insisted, clutching a framed photograph of her daughter. Something's happened to my baby. For days, the search continued. Linda's face stared out from hastily printed flyers taped to telephone poles and store windows. The case dominated coffee shop conversations and Sunday sermons. Theories multiplied. She'd eloped with a secret boyfriend. She'd been kidnapped by a passing drifter. She'd fallen into bad company from the city center. But as days turned to weeks and weeks to months, The searches grew smaller. The prayer circles dwindled. The police visits became less frequent. Hope drained away like water through cupped hands, leaving only whispered rumors and uncomfortable silence. Oak Cliff continued its routines, but something had changed. Mothers called their children in earlier. Doors that once stayed unlocked were now bolted tight. And the Collins house stood as a silent reminder that sometimes people simply vanished without a trace. Detective Ava Moreno carefully placed the sealed evidence bag containing the fabric scrap into a secure transport container. The faded bloodstain, preserved for nearly 50 years, might finally speak after decades of silence. Modern forensic techniques could extract information that investigators in the 70s could only dream about. "I need priority processing on this," she told the lab technician at the Dallas Forensic Facility. "It's from the Collins case." The technician nodded with understanding. Everyone in the department knew about the rediscovered evidence box. As Ava completed the chain of custody paperwork, she felt the weight of Linda's mother's hopes resting on her shoulders. The elderly woman had lived nearly half a century without answers. Back at the precinct, Samuel Ortiz had transformed a corner of the evidence room into his personal workspace. Files and photographs from the original investigation spread across the table as he meticulously digitized each document. The young technician had become increasingly invested in the case, staying late after his shifts ended. "Detective, I think I found something," Samuel called out when Ava returned. His eyes shone with excitement as he pointed to a handwritten note buried in the case files. The original detectives interviewed a gas station attendant who mentioned seeing a green Mercury Cougar parked near the pharmacy where Linda worked. It was only mentioned once in these notes. Ava leaned closer, studying the yellowed paper. "Good catch. Any information about the owner?" "Nothing conclusive, but there's more." Samuel shuffled through several pages. Linda's mother reported a missing silver ring when she disappeared. It had her initials engraved on it, LRC. The original investigators noted it, but focused more on finding Linda than tracking down jewelry. The detective nodded thoughtfully. These details, seemingly minor 50 years ago, could be crucial connections now. She pulled up a chair beside Samuel. Their shared determination creating an unspoken bond. "We need to cross-reference vehicle registrations from '73, Ava said. "Find out who owned Mercury Cougars in the Oak Cliff area." "I'll start pulling those records," Samuel replied, already reaching for his computer. For 3 days, they waited for the lab results while pursuing these new leads. The anticipation in the cold case division grew with each passing hour. When Ava's phone finally rang, the entire office fell silent. "We have a partial DNA profile," the lab technician reported. "It's degraded, but there's enough to work with. We've got both victim DNA and an unknown male contributor." Ava closed her eyes briefly. Science had just breathed new life into a case that had gone cold when Nixon was still president. For the first time since opening that evidence box, she allowed herself to believe they might actually solve this, that Linda Ray Collins might finally get justice. The DNA lab report landed on Ava Moreno's desk with a thud that belied its weight in promise. The fabric from Linda Ray Collins' case had yielded a complete male DNA profile, pristine despite its 48 years in storage. Ava's initial excitement quickly faded as she scanned the results. No matches in CODIS or any law enforcement database. "Nothing," she told Samuel Ortiz, who had been checking in daily since they'd sent the sample. "Whoever left this DNA has never been arrested, at least not since we started collecting samples." The technician's shoulders slumped. "All that work for another dead end?" Ava tapped her pen against the report. "Not necessarily. There's another option, but it's complicated." That afternoon, she sat in her supervisor's office, outlining her proposal to upload the DNA profile to a civilian genealogical database, the kind people use to discover distant relatives or ancestry details. The legal implications were significant. Privacy advocates had challenged such methods before. This isn't just any cold case, Ava argued. This is Linda Collins. Oak Cliff has waited 48 years. After 3 days of deliberation and consulting with the district attorney's office, approval came through with strict parameters. Ava submitted the profile herself, then settled in for what might be months of waiting. The call came just 23 days later. "We have a familial match," the forensic genealogist explained. "Not direct, but close enough to build a family tree." The Whitmore family of Tarrant County shows multiple distant cousins with DNA markers consistent with your sample. Ava and Samuel worked with the genealogist to construct a sprawling family chart, eliminating branches through age, location, and gender. The possibilities narrowed to 3 Whitmore men who would have been in the Dallas area in 1973. "This one," Samuel said, pointing to a name on the screen. Earl Whitmore. He worked for Dallas City Utilities from 1970 to 1995. Ava felt a chill as she pulled up his driver's license photo. Earl Whitmore, 76 years old, had lived just 30 miles away in Fort Worth for decades. His employment records confirmed he had been assigned to infrastructure projects throughout Oak Cliff during the early 70s. "He would have known the area intimately," she murmured. "Every street, every alley." The detective compiled a background report. No criminal record, retired, widowed briefly in the 60s with no children, living alone in the same modest house for 30 years. Nothing remarkable except for one detail. He still owned a 1972 Mercury Cougar, registered and maintained with meticulous care. "We need to be absolutely certain," Ava told her team, as she pinned Earl's photo to the investigation board. "This man has lived a seemingly normal life for half a century. If he's our suspect, we need to prove it beyond any doubt." The unmarked police vehicle sat idling across from Earl Whitmore's modest Fort Worth home. Detective Ava Moreno adjusted her binoculars, studying the elderly man as he methodically pruned roses in his front garden. 3 days into surveillance, and his routine remained predictably mundane. "He waters those plants at exactly 6:15 every morning," Samuel Ortiz remarked from the driver's seat, passing Ava a coffee. The young technician had volunteered for field duty, his investment in the case growing deeper with each passing day. Ava nodded silently. Whitmore moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had organized his life into perfect compartments. His weathered hands worked carefully among the thorns, his expression never changing. There was something unsettling about his solitude. No visitors, no friends, just the occasional nod to passing neighbors, who seemed to barely register his existence. "Tomorrow's Wednesday," she noted, "his Oak Cliff Day." The weekly trips to the neighborhood where Linda Ray Collins had disappeared nearly 5 decades earlier had raised immediate red flags. The retired utility technician would drive his sedan, not the vehicle hidden in his garage, to a small diner on Jefferson Boulevard, eat the same meal, then spend hours walking the streets before returning home. Back at headquarters that evening, Ava spread out maps of Oak Cliff from both eras, 1973 and present day. She traced Whitmore's current walking routes against the utilities' coverage maps from the year of Linda's disappearance. "He worked less than 3 blocks from the Collins family home," Samuel pointed out, overlaying employment records they'd obtained. "And his service calls took him down Edgefield Avenue at least twice monthly." The weight of this revelation settled heavily on Ava's shoulders. She thought of Linda's mother, now elderly and frail, who still lived in the same house, waiting decades for answers. The proximity wasn't coincidental. It was a pattern emerging from the dust of history. Later that night, Ava called her father, the retired Dallas police officer who had witnessed the original investigation's failure firsthand. "We're watching him, Dad," she said quietly. "He's so ordinary. Nothing about him screams killer." "The worst ones never do, Ava," her father replied. "That's how they hide in plain sight for so long." The next morning, Ava watched through rain-streaked windows as Whitmore emerged from his house, carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. He placed it carefully in his car before departing for Oak Cliff. "Follow him," she instructed the surveillance team, "but keep your distance." As the vehicles pulled away, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that they were following not just a man, but a ghost who had haunted Dallas for 48 years, a specter who had been hiding behind the perfect disguise, unremarkable normality. After 2 weeks of surveillance, Detective Ava Moreno decided it was time to move forward. The team had established Earl Whitmore's routine down to the minute. Every Tuesday, he placed his garbage bins at the curb precisely at 7:15 in the morning. "We need something with his DNA," Ava told Samuel Ortiz as they sat in an unmarked vehicle half a block from Whitmore's modest Fort Worth home. "Something he's discarded." Samuel nodded, understanding the legal nuances. Abandoned property in public spaces required no warrant, a crucial detail that could make or break their case. At 7:20, after Whitmore returned inside, Officer Martinez, dressed as a sanitation worker, approached the bins. With gloved hands, he retrieved a small plastic bag containing a discarded toothbrush and several tissues. The collection took less than 30 seconds. Back at the forensic lab, technicians worked meticulously. The toothbrush, a simple blue drugstore brand with worn bristles, potentially held the key to unlocking a 48-year-old mystery. "How long until we know?" Samuel asked, pacing the hallway outside the lab. "At least 48 hours, Ava replied, her voice steady despite the tension building in her shoulders. "They're prioritizing it, but the science takes time." The wait was excruciating. Ava buried herself in reviewing the original case files, studying Linda Ray Collins' routine that summer morning in 1973. The 19-year-old had walked the same route to the pharmacy every day, passing the utility work site where Whitmore had been assigned. When her phone finally rang at 11:37 on Thursday night, Ava answered before the first ring completed. "It's a match," the lab technician said. 99.8% certainty. The DNA from Whitmore's toothbrush matches the male profile from the blood-stained fabric. The detective sat motionless, absorbing the weight of confirmation. After nearly 5 decades, science had accomplished what witness statements and hunches could not. By morning, Ava had secured an arrest warrant. The department assembled a tactical team, standard procedure for apprehending murder suspects, regardless of their age or apparent harmlessness. "We move tomorrow," she informed her supervisor during their briefing. First light. As she prepared the final documentation, Ava found herself thinking about Linda's mother. The elderly woman had lived half a century with unanswered questions about her daughter's disappearance. "This isn't just an arrest," she told Samuel as they finalized the operation details. "We're about to reopen wounds that have barely scarred over. Oak Cliff has lived with this ghost for generations." Samuel nodded, understanding the gravity. Sometimes healing can't begin until the truth comes out. Ava stared at Earl Whitmore's driver's license photo clipped to the case file. The unremarkable face of a man who had carried a terrible secret for 48 years. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "everything changes." The pale October sun had barely crested the horizon when 5 police cruisers silently converged on Earl Whitmore's modest brick home in Fort Worth. Detective Ava Moreno stood beside her unmarked vehicle, her breath visible in the morning chill as she watched the tactical team take position. After decades of freedom, justice was finally coming for the man who had haunted Oak Cliff since 1973. "Execute the warrant," she commanded into her radio, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. The officers moved with practiced precision, surrounding the small house with its neatly trimmed hedges and faded American flag. The doorbell rang once, followed by the authoritative announcement, "Fort Worth Police Department, we have a warrant." Neighbors emerged from nearby homes, still clutching coffee mugs and wearing bathrobes. They watched in stunned silence as the elderly man who had lived among them for years was led from his front door. Earl Whitmore moved with slow, deliberate steps, his thin frame appearing even smaller between the 2 officers escorting him. His weathered face remained expressionless, his gaze fixed on the concrete beneath his feet. The handcuffs glinted in the morning light, the only thing about him that seemed to reflect any emotion. "Is that Earl?" whispered a woman from across the street. What on earth could he have done? As the retired utility technician was placed in the back of a patrol car, Ava caught his eye for just a moment. There was no surprise there, no protest of innocence, just a vacant acceptance that chilled her more than any resistance might have. Within hours, news of the arrest spread like wildfire through Dallas and Oak Cliff. Local television stations interrupted regular programming with breaking news alerts. Social media exploded with shocked reactions as details emerged connecting the quiet neighbor to the decades-old disappearance of Linda Ray Collins. "He's been living here all this time," a longtime Oak Cliff resident told reporters gathered outside the police station. "Walking the same streets, shopping in our stores. A ghost hiding in plain sight." In a modest home on Edgefield Avenue, Linda's mother sat motionless as her phone rang. Her arthritic fingers trembled as she answered, hearing Ava's gentle voice deliver the news she had both longed for and dreaded for 48 years. "We've made an arrest, Mrs. Collins," the detective said. "We found him." The elderly woman's free hand clutched at her chest as decades of numb waiting transformed into something sharper and more immediate. Closure, she had always thought, would bring peace. Instead, it brought a fresh wave of grief, crystalline and cutting, as if her daughter had disappeared only yesterday. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Thank you for not forgetting her." The warrant for Earl Whitmore's garage revealed what Detective Ava Moreno had suspected might exist, but hadn't dared hope would still be preserved. As officers pulled back the heavy canvas tarp, a collective hush fell over the team. There sat a 1972 Mercury Cougar, its deep forest green paint dulled by decades, but unmistakably intact. The vehicle appeared frozen in time, as if Whitmore had deliberately preserved it rather than replaced it. "Document everything before we touch it," Ava instructed, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. The detective circled the automobile carefully, noting how meticulously it had been maintained beneath its protective covering. No dust, no significant deterioration, just the inevitable fading that comes with age. Forensic technicians approached the car with reverence, photographing every angle before carefully opening the driver's side door. The interior leather seats had cracked slightly, but otherwise remained in remarkable condition. Samuel Ortiz stood nearby, tablet in hand, cross-referencing the vehicle's details with the original case files. "The VIN matches the partial number from the 1973 utility records," he confirmed, glancing up at Ava. "This is definitely the car that witnesses reported seeing near Edgefield Avenue the morning Linda disappeared." As the team worked methodically through the vehicle's interior, a forensic specialist named Ramirez called Ava over. "Detective, we've found trace evidence in the trunk carpeting," she said, pointing to areas only visible under specialized lighting. There appear to be biological samples preserved in the fibers. The team collected samples from multiple locations, their excitement growing with each potential piece of evidence. The Mercury's trunk revealed microscopic blood spatter patterns consistent with violent trauma, while the passenger seat yielded several long hairs trapped in the seat cushion seam. "It's as if he couldn't bear to part with it," Ava murmured to Samuel as they watched the technicians work. "Kept it like a trophy all these years." The vehicle itself told a story: the worn accelerator pedal, the adjusted rear-view mirror positioned for someone of Whitmore's height, the small scratch on the glove compartment that matched the pattern on Linda's recovered silver earring. By evening, the forensics team had collected over 30 distinct samples from the Cougar. Preliminary tests already indicated blood-type matches to the original evidence from 1973. The car had become a macabre time capsule, preserving not just a vehicle, but the evidence of a young woman's final moments. As Ava watched the mercury being carefully loaded for transport to the forensic garage, she felt the weight of what they'd discovered. This wasn't just a breakthrough in the case. It was Linda Ray Collins' silent witness, finally speaking after 48 years of darkness. Samuel Ortiz sat hunched over a stack of dusty folders in the department's archival room. His eyes burned from hours of scanning documents, but his determination hadn't wavered. When he unfolded a yellowed piece of paper from a forgotten file, his heart raced. "Detective Moreno, I found something," he called out, his voice echoing through the basement. "It's a 1973 city utilities map." Ava Moreno hurried over, her usual composed demeanor giving way to anticipation. The map was covered with faded pencil marks and annotations. One section along Jefferson Boulevard had been circled repeatedly, with Earl Whitmore's unmistakable handwriting noting excavation complete and site secured. "This work site," she whispered, tracing the circle with her finger. "It was mentioned in the original reports, but never thoroughly investigated." Samuel nodded. The investigating officers flagged it initially, but without probable cause for a search warrant, they moved on to other leads. The detective straightened up, already reaching for her phone. "We need to cross-reference this with Linda's known routes." Within hours, Ava was sitting in the community library with Sharon Davis, Linda's childhood friend, who now worked as the local librarian. The women spread old yearbooks, community newsletters, and Sharon's personal diaries across a large oak table in a private room. "Linda always took this shortcut," Sharon explained, her finger tracing a path on a neighborhood map. "From her house on Edgefield, behind the pharmacy, and then along Jefferson." Her voice caught. "Right past that utility lot." Ava studied the librarian's face, noting how even after 48 years, the pain remained fresh. Sharon had kept her friend's memory alive through meticulous preservation of their shared history. "Did the police ever ask about her routes back then?" Ava asked. Sharon nodded, adjusting her glasses. "They did, but the worksite wasn't active when she disappeared, or at least, it wasn't supposed to be." She pulled out a brittle newspaper clipping. According to this, city work there had officially concluded 2 weeks earlier. Ava felt a chill. The Utilities Department record showed Whitmore had requested additional time at that site, unauthorized work that never appeared in official schedules. Together, they pieced together a timeline using Sharon's diaries, community event calendars, and the newly discovered map. Every detail, Linda's daily schedule, Whitmore's work assignments, the location of the abandoned lot, formed a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence. "Everything points to this place," Ava said quietly, circling the utility lot on the map. "A perfect spot for an ambush, isolated enough during early morning hours, yet so ordinary nobody would question a utility worker being there." Sharon closed her eyes briefly. "All these years, we've been walking past the answer." Ava gathered the materials, her mind already planning the next steps. The forgotten utility lot on Jefferson Boulevard was no longer just a mark on an old map. It was potentially the site where Linda Ray Collins had met her tragic end. Rain fell in sheets across the abandoned utility lot on Jefferson Boulevard, turning the ground into a muddy quagmire. Forensic technicians in white protective suits worked methodically beneath temporary canopies, their movements deliberate despite the downpour. The excavation site had been carefully marked following the discovery of Earl Whitmore's annotated utility maps from 1973. Ava Moreno stood beneath a black umbrella, her eyes never leaving the excavation. Beside her, Linda's mother waited in silent vigil, her weathered hands clutching a rosary. The elderly woman had insisted on being present, despite Ava's gentle warnings about what they might find. "I've waited 48 years," she had said. "I can bear whatever comes." The ground-penetrating radar showed anomalies exactly where Whitmore marked the site, Samuel Ortiz explained, joining them under the shelter of a nearby tent. The technician had become an integral part of the investigation, his initial discovery now leading to this somber moment of reckoning. The only sounds were the persistent drumming of rain on canvas and the scrape of tools against concrete and soil. Occasionally, Linda's mother would whisper prayers, her voice barely audible above the weather. Several officers stood at a respectful distance, their presence both protective and reverent. "We've got something," called the lead forensic anthropologist, her voice cutting through the rainfall. The digging slowed, becoming more precise as gloved hands carefully brushed away decades of earth. Ava squeezed Linda's mother's hand as they approached the edge of the excavation. The detective's usual composure wavered as the team gently uncovered what was unmistakably human remains. Bones, browned by time and soil, emerged from their long concealment. "Oh, my Linda," whispered her mother, her body trembling, but her gaze unflinching. As the team continued their meticulous work, a small object caught the light despite years of tarnish. A silver ring, partially buried beside what appeared to be finger bones. The forensic anthropologist lifted it carefully with tweezers, turning it to reveal an engraving. LRC, Linda Ray Collins. The confirmation hit Ava with unexpected force. After months of investigation, the theoretical had become undeniably real. Her professional walls, maintained through countless difficult cases, finally crumbled. Tears mixed with raindrops on her face as she supported Linda's mother, who had collapsed to her knees in grief and relief. "We found her," Ava said, her voice breaking. "We finally found her." The sacred weight of the moment settled over the scene. Officers removed their hats despite the rain. Samuel documented everything with reverent precision. The community's longest-standing mystery was resolving before their eyes, bringing with it both closure and renewed pain. For Ava, the discovery represented more than professional accomplishment. As she wept openly, she realized this case had changed her fundamentally. Some mysteries, once solved, became part of you forever. The forensic lab worked through the night. Ava Moreno paced the hallway outside, checking her smartphone every few minutes. The DNA comparison between the skeletal remains and the sample from Linda's mother was the final piece, the definitive answer to a question that had haunted Dallas for nearly 5 decades. At 7:32 in the morning, Dr. Reyes emerged from the lab, his expression solemn but eyes bright with professional satisfaction. "Detective, we have a 100% maternal DNA match. The remains are Linda Ray Collins." Ava closed her eyes briefly. After months of investigation, the scientific truth was irrefutable. The young woman who had vanished on that sweltering summer day in 1973 had been found. The detective's phone felt heavy in her hand as she prepared to make the call that would forever change an elderly woman's life. "I need to deliver this news in person," she told Samuel Ortiz, who had arrived early to support her. The technician nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. By mid-morning, Ava sat in the modest living room of Linda's childhood home on Edgefield Avenue. The house had changed little over the decades. Faded photographs of Linda still adorn the walls, frozen in time at 19 years old. "It's her, isn't it?" Linda's mother asked before Ava could speak. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she clutched a handkerchief. "I've known since they started digging." "Yes, ma'am. The DNA confirms it." Ava reached across and took the older woman's hand. "Linda has been found." Tears flowed freely down the mother's cheeks. Not the desperate tears of uncertainty that had marked decades of waiting, but tears of confirmation. Grief, long suspended in limbo, surged anew with startling intensity. Yet beneath the sorrow, Ava recognized something else: relief. "All these years," the elderly woman whispered, "all these years wondering if she was out there somewhere needing me." Sharon Davis arrived shortly after, bringing tea and quiet support. The librarian had maintained a weekly visit to her friend's mother since 1975, a ritual of remembrance that had sustained them both. As the 3 women sat together, Linda's mother slowly opened a small jewelry box and removed a silver earring, identical to the one found in the evidence box. "She was wearing the other one that day," she said softly. "I'd like them to be together again." Ava nodded, making a mental note to arrange it once the investigation concluded. The truth, buried beneath concrete and time, had finally emerged into the light. For Ava, this moment represented both an ending and a beginning. Justice now had a clear path forward. For Linda's mother, it was the painful gift of certainty after a lifetime of questions. News of Earl Whitmore's arrest spread through Oak Cliff like wildfire. Within hours, social media groups and neighborhood forums exploded with shocked reactions. Residents who had lived in the area since the 70s recalled the summer when Linda Ray Collins vanished, a moment that had changed their community forever. At the First Baptist Church on Jefferson Boulevard, Reverend Wilson organized a prayer service that drew over 200 people. "Today we acknowledge both justice and pain," he announced to the tearful congregation. Many attendees had known Linda personally, while younger residents came to pay respects to a story that had become local legend. Ava Moreno observed from the back pew, uncomfortable with the attention but moved by the community's response. She watched as Linda's mother received embraces from neighbors who had supported her through decades of uncertainty. "You brought my daughter back to me," the elderly woman whispered when she spotted Ava. The detective simply nodded, words failing her in the face of such raw emotion. At the Oak Cliff Community Library, Sharon Davis arranged a memorial exhibit, displaying yearbook photos, newspaper clippings, and personal items donated by Linda's classmates. The librarian had spent days gathering materials, determined that her childhood friend would be remembered as more than just a victim. "I want people to see who she was," Sharon explained to visitors, "not just what happened to her." Not everyone welcomed the resurfacing of old wounds. At Mabel's Diner, a group of elderly residents debated the case over coffee. "Some things are better left buried," muttered Harold Jenkins, who had lived 3 doors down from the Collins family. "What good does it do now except remind us how unsafe we were and maybe still are?" Others disagreed vehemently. "My granddaughter walks those same streets," countered Margaret Winters. "I need to know justice was served, even if it took half a century." The revelation that Whitmore had lived quietly among them for decades created a ripple of paranoia. Residents scrutinized longtime neighbors with new suspicion. The Oak Cliff Neighborhood Association hastily organized a community safety meeting that drew triple the usual attendance. Samuel Ortiz attended the meeting, watching as Ava fielded difficult questions with practiced calm. The technician had never anticipated how deeply his discovery in the evidence room would affect an entire community. "Will there be others?" one woman asked, her voice trembling. "Other cases, other people like him?" Ava's response was measured. "We continue to review all unsolved cases with new technology and determination," she said, making eye contact with Samuel across the room. "No victim is ever forgotten." Douglas Kai straightened his tie as he entered the Dallas County Courthouse, the weight of 48 years of justice delayed, resting squarely on his shoulders. The veteran prosecutor had tried hundreds of cases throughout his career, but none carried the significance of the Collins murder trial. National news vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like metal flowers seeking the sun. "This isn't just another case," Douglas told Ava Moreno as they climbed the courthouse steps. "This is my legacy. This is what they'll remember me for." The detective nodded, understanding the pressure. The courthouse buzzed with activity as journalists, legal observers, and curious citizens filled the gallery. The Collins case had captivated the nation's attention, a decades-old mystery suddenly solved through modern science and old-fashioned police work. Inside the courtroom, Earl Whitmore sat beside his defense attorney, his weathered face impassive. The retired utility technician hadn't spoken a word about the charges, maintaining the same silence that had protected him for nearly 5 decades. "Your Honor," Whitmore's attorney began during preliminary motions, "we move to exclude all DNA evidence obtained through civilian genealogy databases. This represents an unconstitutional search without proper warrant or consent. The judge, a stern woman with 30 years on the bench, leaned forward. "Mr. Kai, your response." Douglas rose confidently. "The Supreme Court has already established precedent in similar cases. The defendant has no reasonable expectation of privacy in genetic material voluntarily submitted by distant relatives." Every word exchanged felt like walking on thin ice. Ava watched from her seat behind the prosecution table, aware that any procedural misstep could unravel years of painstaking work. Samuel Ortiz sat beside her, the young technician who had first discovered the forgotten evidence box, now fully invested in seeing justice through. The tension in the room escalated as both sides presented arguments about chain of custody for the decades-old evidence. Douglas methodically addressed each challenge, his experience evident in his calm demeanor and precise language. The fabric sample was properly sealed in 1974 and remained untouched until Mr. Ortiz discovered it last year, he explained, projecting photographs of the evidence seals. "The integrity of this evidence is actually superior to many modern samples due to the preservation methods used at the time." During a brief recess, Linda's mother sat quietly in the hallway, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse. Ava approached and sat beside her. "We're doing everything possible," the detective assured her. "Douglas is the best prosecutor in Dallas. If anyone can navigate these legal challenges, it's him." As court resumed, the judge announced her ruling. "The DNA evidence is admissible." A collective exhale swept through the prosecution team, while Whitmore remained expressionless, his silence a wall between him and the justice system that had finally caught up to him. The courtroom fell silent as Martin Reeves, now 76, made his way to the witness stand. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses, the weight of nearly 5 decades visible in every careful movement. As the former gas station attendant from Jefferson Boulevard took his oath, Douglas Kai approached with measured steps. "Mr. Reeves, can you tell us what you saw on the morning of July 18, 1973? Kai asked. Martin cleared his throat, his voice wavering. "I was opening the station early that day, around 6:30. I remember because the delivery truck was late." He paused, searching through the fog of memory. "That green Mercury Cougar caught my eye. It passed by twice within 20 minutes, which seemed odd for that hour." "And did you see who was driving?" "A man, youngish then. Worked for the utilities, I think. Had that uniform." Martin pointed a shaky finger toward Earl Whitmore, who sat motionless at the defense table. "Him. That's him." The defense attorney's cross-examination attacked the reliability of such distant memories, but Martin remained steadfast, despite his uncertainty about peripheral details. Next came Sharon Davis, her librarian's precision evident in her carefully chosen words. The childhood friend of Linda Ray Collins brought with her a collection of yearbooks, diaries, and meticulously preserved notes. "Linda always walked the same route to work," Sharon explained, indicating a hand-drawn map from 1973. "She was consistent that way, said it was exactly 812 steps from her front door to the pharmacy entrance." Sharon's testimony painted Linda as more than just a victim, a young woman with dreams of becoming a pharmacist who collected silver jewelry and wrote poetry about Dallas sunsets. The courtroom seemed to fill with the ghost of who Linda might have become. Ava Moreno watched from her seat beside the prosecutor, her face composed but her hands tightly clasped. Each testimony felt like assembling a delicate house of cards, memories fragile yet crucial, decades old but still sharp with pain. When Sharon produced Linda's journal entry from the day before her disappearance, several jurors visibly reacted. "Saw that utility man again today," Sharon read. "Third time this week. Something about his eyes makes me uncomfortable." Throughout it all, Whitmore remained expressionless, his silence a void, that seemed to consume the emotional energy of the room. Ava found herself searching his face for any flicker of remorse or recognition. As the day's testimony concluded, the detective felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. These weren't just witnesses, but survivors of a different era, carrying fragments of truth that had waited half a lifetime to be heard. Their memories, however imperfect, were finally finding voice in a system that had once failed them. Earl Whitmore sat motionless at the defense table, his weathered hands folded neatly before him. Day after day, as witnesses recounted their memories and forensic experts presented damning evidence, the elderly man maintained an eerie composure that unnerved everyone in the courtroom. His attorney occasionally leaned over to whisper in his ear, but Whitmore's response was always the same, a slight nod, nothing more. Does the defendant wish to make a statement? Judge Harris had asked on multiple occasions, only to be met with the defense attorney rising to speak on Whitmore's behalf. The retired utility technician had exercised his. Ava Moreno watched from her seat beside Douglas Kai, studying the man who had allegedly stolen Linda Ray Collins' future nearly 5 decades ago. The detective found herself searching Whitmore's impassive face for any flicker of emotion, remorse, anger, fear, anything that might humanize him or explain the inexplicable. But his eyes remained fixed forward, revealing nothing. "His silence is a strategy," Kai whispered to her during a recess. "The defense knows anything he says could only hurt their case." But Ava sensed something deeper in Whitmore's silence. It wasn't merely legal strategy. It was a wall he had built decades ago, brick by brick, to separate himself from his actions. The void created by his refusal to speak had become a character in the trial itself, an invisible force that loomed over the proceedings. For Linda's mother, seated in the front row with Sharon Davis beside her for support, Whitmore's silence was another cruelty. The elderly woman had waited 48 years for answers that might never come. "Even if we win, she may never know why," Ava confided to Samuel Ortiz during lunch break in the courthouse cafeteria. "How do you heal without understanding?" Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Maybe justice doesn't always come with explanations. The community felt the weight of Whitmore's silence too. Reporters described him as sphinx-like and inscrutable. Oak Cliff residents packed the courtroom daily, hoping for the moment when the defendant might finally speak, reveal some hidden truth that would make sense of the senseless tragedy that had haunted their neighborhood for generations. As the trial progressed, Ava found herself increasingly troubled by the possibility that Whitmore would take whatever secrets he held to his grave. She wondered if the DNA evidence, the preserved automobile, and the silver ring would be enough to fill the void left by his silence. Justice might be served through a verdict, but would it ever feel complete without the words that only Earl Whitmore could provide? Each night, driving home from the courthouse, Ava struggled with the same question. Could a community truly heal when the answers they sought remained locked behind the silent lips of a man who refused to speak? Douglas Kai moved methodically around the courtroom, a master craftsman assembling an intricate puzzle. The veteran prosecutor approached the evidence table with practiced confidence, lifting the sealed bag containing the blood-stained fabric that had rested undisturbed in the Dallas Police Department's basement for nearly 5 decades. "This evidence," Kai explained to the transfixed jury, "remained untouched since 1974, creating what forensic scientists call the perfect preservation environment." He gestured toward Dr. Eliza Winters, the forensic expert who had testified earlier. As the doctor explained, the paper storage and consistent temperature actually preserved the DNA better than some modern storage methods. The jurors leaned forward as Kai methodically outlined the unbroken chain of custody. Samuel Ortiz sat in the gallery, watching intently as his discovery became the cornerstone of justice. The young technician caught Ava Moreno's eye across the courtroom, both sharing a moment of quiet vindication. "The DNA profile extracted from this fabric," Kai continued, provides a 1 in 8 billion match to the defendant. He paused, letting the statistical certainty sink in. Not 1 in a million, not 1 in 100 million, 1 in 8 billion. Earl Whitmore remained expressionless at the defense table, his silence a void that seemed to absorb the prosecutor's words without reaction. When Kai introduced the preserved Mercury Cougar as evidence, a collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. Photographs of the vehicle were displayed on screens, showing the meticulous preservation that had unwittingly created a time capsule of evidence. The defendant maintained this automobile in nearly pristine condition for 48 years, Kai noted, his voice carrying to the back row. Trace evidence recovered from beneath the passenger seat matches Linda Ray Collins's DNA profile. The silver ring engraved with LRC was presented next, sealed in a clear evidence bag, but visible to all. Linda's mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as the prosecutor held it up, the tarnished metal catching the fluorescent light. The genealogical evidence, Kai continued, displaying a complex chart of DNA relationships, created a map that led investigators directly to Earl Whitmore. This wasn't guesswork or coincidence. This was science writing the final chapter of a story that began in 1973. Throughout the presentation, the defendant never spoke, never reacted. His silence formed the negative space around which the prosecution built its case, a wall of evidence constructed without a single word from the man at its center. As Kai concluded, he gestured toward the evidence arrayed before the jury. "These aren't just objects," he said quietly. "They're voices speaking across time, and they're all saying the same thing." The courthouse emptied as evening fell over Dallas. Ava Moreno's shoulders ached from tension as she drove through familiar streets toward her father's modest bungalow in the older part of town. The trial had been grueling, Earl Whitmore's expressionless face haunting her throughout the proceedings. Robert Moreno, 73 and retired after 30 years with Dallas PD, waited on his front porch, 2 glasses of iced tea sweating on the small table beside him. He rose slowly as Ava approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Rough day?" he asked, embracing his daughter. "Aren't they all?" Ava settled into the wicker chair, taking a long sip of tea. "The defense keeps hammering us on the genealogy evidence, says it's an invasion of privacy." Her father nodded, lowering himself carefully back into his seat. "In my day, we'd have killed for that technology. Half our cases went cold because we couldn't connect the dots." The evening air carried the scent of his neighbor's jasmine. Ava closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself this moment of respite. "You remember the Collins case when it happened?" she asked. "Everyone in the department did. I was just a patrol officer then." Robert's eyes grew distant. Oak Cliff was different, tighter knit. When that girl disappeared, it was like the whole neighborhood held its breath. "And never fully exhaled," Ava added. Silence settled between them, comfortable yet weighted with unspoken thoughts. "Dad, I keep asking myself, what does justice even mean after 48 years? Linda's mother has lived most of her life with this wound." The community moved on. "Whitmore's been walking free all this time." Ava's voice dropped. "Will a guilty verdict really heal anything?" Robert studied his daughter's face. "You know what I used to tell you about cold cases? That they were fool's errands," Ava replied with a half-smile. "That detectives chase them to feed their egos, not to serve justice." "I was wrong." He reached across to touch her hand. "What you've done, giving Linda's mother answers, making Whitmore face consequences, it matters. Maybe not in the way justice matters when wounds are fresh, but it matters." The detective gazed out at the darkening street. "Sharon Davis told me yesterday that Linda's mother sleeps through the night now, first time in decades." "There you go," Robert said softly. "Sometimes closure is its own kind of justice." Ava nodded, feeling the weight shift slightly. "You never thought we'd solve it, did you?" Her father's laugh was gentle. "Not a chance, and I've never been happier to be proven wrong." He raised his glass. To my daughter, who taught this old cop that persistence outlasts time. They clinked glasses as night settled fully over Dallas, a city where the past and present had finally reconciled. March 2022. The Dallas County Courthouse fell silent as the jury filed in after 3 days of deliberation. The air felt thick with anticipation, decades of waiting compressed into these final moments. Judge Eleanor Winters looked toward the jury box. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher with graying temples, rose slowly. We have, Your Honor. Every eye in the packed courtroom fixed on the small slip of paper as it passed from hand to hand. Detective Ava Moreno straightened in her seat at the back of the room, her fingers unconsciously tightening around the case folder in her lap. We find the defendant, Earl Whitmore, guilty of murder in the first degree. The words hung in the air like suspended particles of dust. There was no applause, no outburst, only a profound silence that seemed to mark the end of an era. The kind of silence that follows when a ghost is finally laid to rest. In the front row, Linda's mother wept quietly, her weathered hands clutching the silver ring engraved with LRC. The small piece of jewelry, once buried alongside her daughter's remains, now represented both unimaginable loss and long-awaited justice. Sharon Davis, seated beside her, wrapped a protective arm around the elderly woman's shoulders. Earl Whitmore remained as he had throughout the trial, expressionless, his eyes fixed on some middle distance only he could see. Not once during the proceedings had he spoken a word in his own defense. Douglas Kai stood at the prosecution table, his posture rigid with the weight of responsibility fulfilled. The veteran prosecutor exchanged a brief nod with Ava across the room, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey. Sentencing will be scheduled for April 15th, Judge Winters announced, her gavel striking with finality. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Ava remained seated, watching the scene unfold. Samuel Ortiz approached, his face showing the same mixture of relief and solemnity that Ava felt. It's really over, he said quietly. Ava nodded, exhausted but resolute. I'm sorry I can't assist with that request. There are others waiting. Through the courthouse windows, she could see Oak Cliff in the distance, a community forever changed by both tragedy and truth. Ava's thoughts drifted to the evidence room basement where it all began, to other boxes still waiting, other voices still silent. Her phone buzzed with a message from her father. Proud of you, kid. She slipped the device back into her pocket, her eyes fixed not on the past they had just closed, but on the future and the unfinished work that remained. 6 months after the trial, Oak Cliff had transformed its grief into something tangible. The community garden near Jefferson Boulevard, once an abandoned lot that held terrible secrets, now bloomed with wildflowers surrounding a simple stone marker bearing Linda Ray Collins' name. Every week, fresh bouquets appeared, silent tributes from neighbors who had carried her memory for nearly 5 decades. Linda's mother visited daily, often sitting on a wooden bench donated by the local church. The elderly woman would trace her daughter's engraved name with weathered fingers, finding peace in the certainty that had replaced decades of agonizing questions. Sometimes, Sharon Davis joined her, bringing old yearbooks or photographs, their shared memories now free from the shadow of uncertainty. For Dallas, the case had become more than a solved mystery. It was a testament to persistence. The police department had established a new protocol for reviewing cold cases, inspired by the collaboration between Samuel Ortiz and Ava Moreno. Their methodical approach had proven that time could reveal truth rather than bury it. Samuel had been promoted within the department, his attention to detail now valued in training new technicians. The young man often spoke about the Collins case to recruits, emphasizing how a single overlooked box could change lives. Evidence doesn't expire, he would tell them. It just waits to be understood. Ava found herself changed, in subtle ways. The detective who had once compartmentalized her emotions now kept a framed photograph on her desk. The memorial dedication ceremony, with Linda's mother cutting a ribbon. She had learned that justice wasn't just about verdicts, but about restoring voices to the silent. Earl Whitmore remained as enigmatic in prison as he had been in the courtroom, refusing interviews and visitors. His Mercury Cougar, once preserved as evidence, was eventually donated to a criminal justice museum, a reminder of how objects could speak when people wouldn't. On the anniversary of Linda's discovery, Douglas Kye visited the memorial. The prosecutor stood quietly among the flowers, reflecting on how cases like this defined careers and communities. He had won many trials, but few had resonated so deeply through generations. As twilight fell over Dallas, Ava Moreno closed the last file on the Collins case. The evidence box that Samuel had discovered now sat empty on her desk, a vessel once filled with tragedy, now representing completion. She ran her hand over its worn edges, thinking about all the other boxes waiting in archives across the country. Some stories ended, others waited to be told. And in between lay the patient work of those who refused to let silence have the final word.